The film takes place in the winter of 1982 in the endless, cold wasteland of Antarctica with a group of polar scientists. A group of two unknown people in a helicopter are chasing a sled dog, an Alaskan Malamute, trying to shoot it with a rifle with a telescopic sight. Escaping from its pursuers, the dog runs to the US National Research Base, whose employees become unwitting witnesses of what is happening. The employees of the American base, seeing the helicopter, understand that these are their Norwegian colleagues who are also conducting scientific research in the Arctic. The Norwegians, without giving up on their attempts to kill the dog, drop a hand grenade from the helicopter, but the explosion does not catch the dog. The dog, desperately fighting for its life, tries to run deep into the territory of the American base to hide from its pursuers. The Norwegians decide to land the helicopter in order to follow the dog deep into the space. One of the Norwegians, trying to throw another hand grenade, dropped it from his hands, as a result of which he blows himself up along with the helicopter. The dog runs up close to the American researchers, trying to save itself. The surviving Norwegian points a rifle at the dog and shouts something in his own language, but no one understands him. Then the Norwegian decides to open fire on the dog, but misses, and the bullet wounds the American Bennings in the leg. The commander of the scientific base, Derry, fearing for the lives of his employees, kills the second Norwegian with a revolver shot to the head. The base employees extinguish the burning helicopter, and the dog survives. Later, employee Clark places the dog in a pen with the other dogs of the scientific base. The Americans discuss what happened, but no one has a logical explanation. Pilot McReady and Dr. Copper decide to go to the Norwegian base using a helicopter and find out the motives for what happened. As they approach the Norwegian scientific base, they notice columns of black smoke. Something is wrong. Despite this, McReady and Copper decide to land and explore the base. After landing, it turns out that the Norwegian base is burned and partially destroyed. During the examination, the Americans discover the frozen body of a Norwegian polar explorer. His throat and wrists were cut, and a razor is clutched in his hand. By all indications, he committed suicide. Examining the rest of the premises, McReady and Copper discover an ice block resembling an open sarcophagus, as if something was removed from it. Already leaving the Norwegian base, the polar explorers discover half-burned remains resembling human ones and decide to deliver them to their base to conduct an autopsy. Along with the remains, McReady and Copper deliver to their base the video recordings that were discovered during the survey of the Norwegian base. After performing an autopsy, biologist Blair states that the remains correspond to normal human ones without detecting any anomalies. At this time, the rescue dog, which was placed in the kennel, begins to transform into a monster. Its mouth split, and a long tongue resembling a tentacle began to wriggle out of it, and spider legs and tentacles begin to grow out of its body, tearing the flesh. The other dogs that were in the cage raised a terrible howl and began to try to leave the cage by gnawing through the steel bars. However, something that was born from the rescue dog began to absorb one dog after another, splashing them with some liquid from its mouth, not giving a chance for salvation. The commotion in the kennel attracts Clark's attention, and he decides to check what is happening there. Having opened the kennel cage, Clark was knocked down by the dogs running out, and hundreds of tentacles of the monster were wriggling in the middle of the cage. Clark managed to close the kennel cage. McReady, who also heard a strange noise, without hesitation turns on the alarm at the station, grabs a shotgun and rushes into the kennel. The rest of the base staff runs up after him. Clark tells the whole group that there is something in the cage, a monster. McReady fires several shots from a shotgun at the monster, but it turns out to be immune to bullets. Something, having released long paws, broke through the ceiling and tried to hide, but by this time, Childs arrived with a flamethrower in his hands and fired a volley towards the monster, burning it. Having delivered the remains of the monster to the lab, the doctor performs an autopsy and reports that this organism has an unknown nature and is able to imitate the properties and features of another creature. Absorbing it, the polar explorers decide to look through the surveillance footage that McReady and Copper managed to get from the Norwegian base. As a result, they learned that 80 kilometers from their base, the Norwegians discovered a block of ice that they blew up with thermal charges. Wanting to find out what exactly the Norwegians discovered, McReady, Copper, and Norris go to the location of the find, having calculated it on the map. Having reached the indicated location by helicopter, the group realizes that the Norwegians have discovered a ship of alien origin, which they immediately decide to examine. Having examined the ship externally, the scientists assume that the ice pushed it to the surface gradually, and the ice block itself, in which the ship was encased, is about 100,000 years old. It becomes clear to the scientists that next to the alien ship, the Norwegians cut out an ice block in which there was a frozen creature of alien origin and delivered it to their base, where they extracted it from the ice. Blair, conducting research on the monster cells, finds out that the probability of a living creature becoming infected with an alien organism is 75%. The computer's calculations also showed that if something lands on a densely populated continent, it will be able to infect the entire planet with its cells in 27,000 hours. During a conversation between Macready and Fuchs, the latter reports that he is concerned about Blair's behavior and reads out his research results. Something can imitate 1,000,000 life forms, can take the form of any creature. The remains still show cellular activity. They are still alive. At this time, Windows witnessed how the remains brought from the Norwegian base merge with Bennings, absorbing him with the same tentacles as the monster in the kennel. It turns out that the corpses brought from the Norwegian base were infected with an alien organism. Windows read for help and brought Macready, but the already infected Bennings disappeared. The alarm was turned on at the base again. The assembled group overtakes the infected Bennings on the street. He tries to escape, but falls, hitting a barrel of fuel, as a result of which he is soaked in it. The monster in him begins to scream shrilly, and Macready burns the infected Bennings with a signal bomb. Soaked in spilled fuel, something burns to the ground. Macready, along with the whole group, decides to burn all the remains they have, since they can also be infected with the cells of the alien organism. After burning the remains, the group realizes that Blair was missing from them all this time, and they begin to search for him. At this time, Blair, realizing that the monster could be any person at the base, manages to destroy all means of transportation, the radio station, and kill all the remaining dogs, wanting to prevent the alien organism from spreading beyond the scientific base. When the polar explorers discover Blair, he opens fire on them, fearing that they are infected. During the struggle, Macready's group manages to neutralize Blair and lock him in a storage room. Realizing that something could be any of the group members, the polar explorers decide to check who is still human and who is not. Copper suggests taking a blood sample from all the group members and mixing it with uninfected blood. The resulting reaction will help determine which of the group members is infected with alien cells. The research base's storage facility had blood reserves from each polar explorer in case a transfusion was needed. However, it soon becomes clear that all the blood reserves for transfusion have been destroyed. The base commander, Gary, and Dr. Copper had access to the storage facility, and suspicion fell on them. Macready gathers the remaining group of people outside and points a flamethrower at them to test the group's reaction to the threat of flame. However, the entire group reacts calmly. Macready admits that not all of the remaining people are infected, and warns that a storm will begin in 6 hours, and that by that time, it is necessary to determine which of the remaining people are infected. At the barrel of a flamethrower, Macready orders Copper, Gary, and Clark to step aside from the rest of the group and orders them to be injected with morphine. Since he suspected them most of all of being infected, Macready decides for himself not to allow the infection to spread. While he keeps a diary entry where he says that he does not trust anyone, the power goes out mysteriously at the base. It soon becomes clear that someone blew a fuse, temporarily cutting off power to the base. It also turns out that Fuchs is missing. Macready, Windows, and Nose go looking for him and find his remains covered in snow, burned. At this time, Macready notices that the light is turning on in his office and decides to go there with Knowles, sending Windows to the rest of the group. A storm begins. Macready and Knowles tie themselves with a safety rope so as not to get lost in it, and head to Macready's office. The group that remains to wait, due to the long absence of Macready and Knowles, decides to barricade the doors. Soon Knowles returns and knocks on the door. The group opens it. Frowncy Knowles says that during the power outage he found Macready's torn jacket, and during a trip to his office, he cut the safety rope and ran to the group, leaving Macready alone in the storm to die, as he believes him to be infected. Seeing Macready's torn jacket, the group begins to suspect that he is infected infected. Everyone turns against MacReady. Returning, MacReady tries to open the door, but the group does not answer him. Having the key, he closes the door from the outside, thus blocking the group. The group cuts through the blocked door from the inside. On the street, they are met by MacReady holding a stick of dynamite, threatening to blow it up. MacReady forces the group that came out to lay down their arms. At this time, Norris has a heart attack. Dr. Copper begins to carry out resuscitation measures, when suddenly, Norris's chest opens and bites off the doctor's hands. He dies. MacReady burns Norris's infected body with a flamethrower. MacReady decides to test the survivors for infection by using a hot wire, deciding that something will react. To do this, he gathers everyone in one room. At this time, Clark, not wanting to obey MacReady, attacks him holding a scalpel in his hand, but MacReady manages to shoot Clark in the head. The rest of the group did not resist MacReady's desire to conduct a test. MacReady ties all the members of the group to chairs and takes blood samples from them, then brings a hot wire to them. Windows' blood turned out to be uninfected. He sighed with relief. The blood of the deceased Dr. Copper and the murdered Clark also turned out to be uninfected. Having brought the wire to Palmer's blood sample, it jumped out of the test tube. He turned out to be infected. A frightened MacReady dropped the flamethrower, and the Palmer monster, chained to a chair, begins to transform. His head splits and the two halves grow teeth, with which it manages to grab windows. The flamethrower that MacReady drops gems, but eventually works, burning the infected Palmer. The monster wriggles through the wall and runs out into the street, where it explodes and finally burns out. Windows, bitten by Palmer, is also burned, since he has become infected. MacReady continues the test with the remaining members of the group. Next was Knowles. His blood turned out to be uninfected. The head of the scientific base, Gary, is also tested for infection. Having checked all the members of the group, MacReady reports that Blair, who was previously locked in the pantry, is still left. MacReady goes to check it out. MacReady and other members of the group reach the storage room using a safety rope, but Blair is not there. He escaped by breaking down the door locked from the outside. In the storage room, under the floor, the polar explorers discovered a tunnel in which there is a small flying apparatus which Blair was building. Realizing the hopelessness of the situation, MacReady tells Gary and Knowles that they must prevent the monsters from spreading beyond the base, and decides to blow it up. The polar explorers agree. Leaving the storage room, MacReady blows it up along with the flying apparatus that Blair was building. Throwing a stick of dynamite, MacReady, Knowles, and Gary begin to blow up the base's rooms, one after another, throwing dynamite sticks into them. The group goes down to the generator room and spreads out to install explosive charges. Gary, who has gone too far, is attacked by the infected Blair, who assimilates himself along with Gary, making him infected, and then drags him away. Knowles suspected something was wrong and moved towards where Gary was and disappears. MacReady, realizing that he was alone in the generator room, sensing a threat, lights a stick of dynamite, but the ground beneath him begins to move. Something attacks him, knocking the dynamite out of his hands and dragging away the detonator from the installed charges with a tentacle. The monster straightens up to its full height, moving many tentacles. From its right side crawls out the head of a mutilated dog. It was enormous, apparently having collected several bodies of polar explorers. Without waiting for the attack, MacReady grabs the knocked out dynamite and throws it at the monster. All the installed charges detonate, tearing apart the base. MacReady miraculously gets out into the street. Among the ruins and the burning base, he is met by the also surviving Childs, who offers him to come up with a way to get out of the base. When MacReady asks where he was, Childs answers that he noticed Blair running away and ran after him, and then got lost. However, MacReady is not sure that Childs is still human, and offers him to wait a little to avoid surprises for each other. Despite the fact that they are in danger of death, Childs agrees and takes a sip from the bottle, and the laughing MacReady puts his head on the twisted metal and closes his eyes.